Australian journalist Jessica Mudditt has worked in the UK, Bangladesh and Myanmar. It's her extraordinary time in Myanmar that she's chosen to be the subject of her first book. It's called Our Home in Myanmar. Jessica joins us from Sydney now. Good morning, Jessica. Nice to have you on the program.
Hi, Carly. Thanks for having me.
I have two quick your book related questions from one journalist to another, if that's okay.
Sure.
I have to ask, how are you going in New South Wales?
It's pretty dreary. This is my 11th week in lockdown, and I've got a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I bought a trampoline, which came this week. So we'll be doing that this weekend.
Oh, we feel for you. I think we're only about back in week 3 or 4 in Auckland, and it's very monotonous, that's for sure. And then my second question is, where were you for September 11?
I was in Melbourne, where I grew up, and I was at home with Mum and Dad. And I remember, being struck by the images of just how, just the feeling of disbelief. It sort of looked like the news was playing a movie. And then it kind of setting in. And then afterwards, I went to Morocco. I'd planned to go fairly soon after that, and we had to put Canadian flags on our bags because we were advised that if people thought we were Americans, there could be, a negative reaction. So it was really, the repercussions were felt, weren't they, for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we've seen many other things since that time, which takes us to your time in Myanmar. You've written this book about it, fantastic book about your experiences there. But prior to writing this book and indeed to living there, why did you want to go? Because it was a long-held ambition for you to get there, right?
It really was. Yeah, I've always loved travelling, and I wanted it to be the very first place I went when I backpacked for a year. But there was really difficult rules for tourists. You had to fly in and out of the same place, and it would have been quite costly. It would have been a short time. So I kind of just put it on the back burner. And then when I was living in Bangladesh, I had a contact to this Australian publishing magnate who owns the Myanmar Times. So I wrote to him and said, could I come? And he said, sure, you could come for a trial. And that was in 2012. And I was really happy that it worked out that way because I wasn't going there as a tourist. I was going there, as a journalist, and ended up staying there 4 years, which was, better than the couple of weeks that I would have had. Although I'm sure that wouldn't have been my first and only trip to Myanmar.
And tell us about your life in Myanmar. Your book's out, people can read your book, but tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book and some of the experiences that you had.
Well, it was a really special time in Myanmar. Part of the appeal was that Aung San Suu Kyi had been released from house arrest after 15 years. The media was really changing. So instead of having all these draconian censorship laws, like having to submit the newspaper to the censorship authorities before it could be printed, and then, cutting out a lot of it, all of that was changing because Myanmar was changing. And so I wanted to witness, that historic change. And that was all sort of culminating in the 2015 election. So the timing seemed really good to know the country really well, and then be there for that, incredibly historic moment when Aung San Suu Kyi's party won. So it was a really optimistic time. And then when I left Myanmar, under quite difficult circumstances, I thought I want to write a book about the new Myanmar. This, it's moved out of the darkness. From dictatorship, it's embraced democracy. The rightful leader is leading the country. And so that's what I thought I was doing. And I thought, okay, well, it might be the first of these kind of new books about Myanmar because a lot of the books about Myanmar are necessarily, very dark and very sad. And then when the coup happened on the 1st of February, I realised, well, this might be a history book because that door has closed again. So I'm not sure. I hope it's not a history book. But I just wanted, it was such an incredible time, with so many different things happening, and I wanted to document that and the experience of being an expat in a country that's changing rapidly but still has an incredible number of quirks to living there.
Yeah, tell us about some of those challenges of living there and what you miss about your time living there.
Well, every day was interesting, and I certainly can't say that for lockdown in Sydney.
Yeah.
My taxi ride to work was interesting. I never read a book in a taxi or anything. I was always just looking at the streets, which were incredibly interesting. Sorry, can you repeat the question? I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, absolutely. What were some of the challenges of working and living there as an expat?
Yeah, sorry. So renting, for one. So you had to pay a year's rent up front, but there was no international banking. And so my husband and I realised even if we had the money, how would we access the money? So we had to put all our faith into a hotel manager that we'd spoken to about 3 times for him to wire in a year's rent. And then he didn't turn up at the appointed meeting time. And I just felt so sick. And so there were things like that. And finding a property was really difficult. You had to leave the country every 70 days to get a new visa. And so when you had an employer backing you, that was fine because, you know, they go and put you on give you the flight and the accommodation and things. But when I became a freelance journalist, all that kind of visa bureaucracy becomes, you know, incredibly challenging and stressful. But you sort of, you find a way. Everything, society is quite relationship based. So you sort of leverage those personal connections to, help you with the day-to-day. Yeah. It's very much a trust society because the authorities you can't rely on them. I mean, in fact, someone said to me, you know, you don't go to the police for help because the police will make your life very difficult. So people have to find their own solutions. And so in the absence of, you know, a rule of law or any kind of government support, people, you see that even now, they're living in incredibly difficult circumstances, but they help each other out with the most incredible cooperation. And that's, you know, feeding each other and, you know, organising transportation of rice and medicines and that kind of thing. So, because it's the people versus the state.
So I guess when you think of your friends and colleagues in Myanmar now, you know that they'll be looking after each other despite the events going on.
I know that they're trying. One really interesting example is COVID is absolutely sweeping through the population. It may be as much as 50% of people have COVID. So, but the public hospitals have been, you know, now they're military run, and the military are not caring for people. They turn people away, and they treat their own personnel. So the private hospitals are treating people for free. The problem, though, with that is that, you know, it's a population of 54 million. So the private hospitals, they can't treat everyone, but they're just doing that to help their own people, which is quite extraordinary. Can you imagine sort of, you know, Australia and New Zealand's private hospitals just, you know, opening their doors and saying everything, you know, all the medicines, all the treatment you need, and don't pay a cent.
Yeah, incredible stuff. You left. Can you tell us briefly about your final days and the events that caused you to have to leave?
Yeah, it was sad. So even though it was a really optimistic time, it was a bit of a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that was, you know, even true with Aung San Suu Kyi leading the country. And one of her, you know, hugely unfortunate blind spots is the Muslim Rohingya. And so my husband is from Bangladesh, and we were noticing anti-Islamophobia, and that was kind of ramping up. There was a very strong Buddhist nationalist movement, which, you know, is curious of itself. And he had some nasty incidents, and that eventually culminated in him going on what was supposed to be, you know, a routine visa run to Bangkok, and he got locked out of the country. So we just moved house, and, you know, we had all our belongings, you know, a cat, all these things that I had to organise to export her. And he never got the chance to say goodbye to a country that he loved, and his colleagues and his friends. You know, we'd been there almost 5 years by that point. So I just packed up very quickly and quietly and left the country. And it did leave a sort of bitter taste in my mouth for that to be the reason that we left.
I'm sure that you hope to get back there someday. In the meantime, you've written about your experiences. The book is called Our Home in Myanmar, 4 Years in Yangon, written by author Jessica Mudditt. Thanks very much for your time on the program today.
Thank you, Carly.
And all the best with a 2- and a 1-year-old in lockdown. Crikey, that's tough.
They keep me on my toes.
Good on you, Jessica. Thanks very much. The book is called Our Home in Myanmar by Jessica Mudditt.